A very good morning, everyone. Today is the second episode of AI's Immersion, and hope you benefited from our first episode. Today's topic will be US elections and its implications for the world order. Yeah, so let's get to today's talk. Hello, Mr. Nishant.
Yeah, good morning.
And the election is over. However, the counting is not yet over in US. And it's really interesting because India counts it in a day. They take so much of time, and they call themselves, the oldest democracy.
Yeah. So that's the thing. No. So nowadays, now people are there's interesting satire being written by this African journalist who's reporting the American elections. In other words, like how American newspapers would report about third world elections. That a coup is being staged. He was saying something along the lines of the opposing candidate or the resisting candidate wins the elections, but the dictator holds on to power. So he was just making fun of the American system and pointing out the absurdity of how hypocritical it is for them to criticize other democracies.
And we call, they are the oldest democracy. However, this time's turnout, which they call it to be historic since 1908, it's just 65%, which is very normal in India.
It's very normal in India, especially if you go to states like Northeast and the South, it's much higher also.
Yeah.
The Northeast, they hit 70s and 70s quite easily also, right? So the thing with the US elections is, that is a problem in one sense, right? Because, and another thing is a lot of observers and election watchers have been saying that, can this inefficiency in conducting elections qualify US as a democracy on the World Democracy Index and things like that, right? Because when India calls itself a democracy, the election process, the election machinery is one of the positives to call India a democracy or a forebearer of democracy in other terms.
So in terms of governance, we better qualify as a democracy when it comes to electoral process.
Electoral process. So largely that's why they say India is a procedural democracy. And however, the substance is questioned.
Questioned, yeah.
Well, the US had, you can now say that perhaps you can question the US on both substantive and procedural grounds, right?
Okay.
Because of some of what's going on. Yeah.
So my next part, I think we should talk about how the systems are different. The election system itself is different because here it's more about the popular vote.
Yeah.
And there it is predominantly determined by the electoral college. So we should compare and contrast.
Yeah. So just to give some data before we move on. So the difference between popular vote and electoral college is this. So we should start with 2016, though it has happened much before, but 2016 is an easier reference for us to understand this issue. So Hillary Clinton won by about 2 to 3 million votes, but she wasn't the president of the United States, and President Trump became the president. Okay, this is because the Americans select the candidate, the presidential candidate, by this process known as the Electoral College. Okay, the Electoral College historically was largely so that the states have their voice, because the American model of federalism is such that the states come together to give rise to the federation, right? So the states have more say. That was one point. And the second point was also to prevent tyranny of the majority by giving more say for the states in who the national candidates would be, right? Because states could have differing voices and an alternative candidate or a poll can easily arise. So I think Trump would be the best example of this, but Trump seems to have, the effect seems to be paradoxical, right? Because Trump seems to be the person who is legitimizing tyranny of the majority, in other words, which is the white man, more or less, right? So it was famously called as a white lash, the 2016
elections
against a black man who was Obama. So there has been a lot of analysis along those lines. So coming back to now, Biden looks like he's President Joe Biden, President-elect Joe Biden, we must say, is winning by about 80 million votes, right? So Electoral College, in terms of the Electoral College, it seems to have flipped. Okay, Hillary Clinton had about 227 in 2016, who was the losing candidate, and Biden now, President Trump now has about 232. So give and take 5, right? So the magic number is 270.
Yeah.
to win the elections. So if
Mhm.
you cross 270, you become the president.
President. Yeah.
So we'll start talking about the elections, and then we'll slowly move on to, you know, how the primary systems and the party system in the US is organized. Okay. So we'll initially begin.
Shall we just give an overview about how electoral college system is different from the Indian type, so that viewers get a general understanding?
Yeah, well, we just, we spoke about it superficially. So the way it's different is, India follows something called FPTP,
Yes.
the first past the post system, right?
Yeah.
And for the presidential elections, we use single transferable vote system, which is, you know, the elected representatives of the legislative assemblies and the MPs, their votes keep getting transferred, and I'm sure you will be aware of that. But whereas for the Lok Sabha elections, we have FPTP, the candidate who gets the most number of votes wins. Okay. So when it comes to the electoral college, what happens is, the states, right? The states have a certain number of electors, right? Or electoral college votes, which is fixed on like multiple criteria formulas, largely geography, but the purpose is not purely geography, because if you give geography, California and New York would get all the electoral college votes, because the coastal states are largely populated, whereas the the Midwest states and the southern states are sparsely populated.
Yeah.
Right, but they were important parts of the American Union. So multiple factors are considered, for instance, to determine these electoral college votes, right? And basically, when a candidate wins a certain state, so the president is elected, let's say at the state level, and let us say, for instance, Pennsylvania has something like 20 electoral college votes, and if Trump or Biden, whoever gets past the 50 mark, whoever wins by the higher percentage, it can be 0.1 or 0.2 or whatever, then they get all the electoral college votes.
Okay.
And then you go state by state, and whoever crosses 270 wins the American election.
So while talking about the states, which were the states that were game changing this time?
So pretty much what has happened this time is, the states flipped by Trump last time was flipped back by Biden this time. So it seems to be a difference between the trust deficit in Hillary Clinton versus Joe Biden. Joe Biden is famously known as middle class Joe. He's known for the middle, you know, he gives a lot of, there's a lot of social gaffes that he commits, which is like he says a lot of things in public, you know, without understanding the formality of the situation. So people find him relatable. Right? And it's true that he has stood by the working class quite a few times, you know. He has strong union support, right? He has a good base. He has good trust in states like, for instance, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Okay.
Right? Now, these states are where the iron and steel industries are located, right? And a lot of these industrial and manufacturing, the industrial Midwest, right? These states are called the industrial Midwest states.
So what happened when it comes to Georgia and Arizona?
So when it comes to Georgia and Arizona, so with Georgia this time, it has been a traditional Republican stronghold, but Georgia also has a huge black population. Okay, so there was this very effective and charismatic leader called Stacey Abrams. So what she did is, she organized the black vote, and she also got them to, for instance, so it is famously said that Democrats win elections if more people vote, right? The more enthusiasm that they can generate, they vote. So even last time, for instance, Trump won against Clinton, not because they voted for Trump, but they didn't vote for Clinton, so they stayed back home. So with black people, generally, there's a lot of voter suppression. It is a famous term used in the US.
Okay.
So what happens is, Stacey Abrams got them legally registered as, you know, citizens, and she got them registered to vote, and she has managed to flip. It's a historic achievement touted by the Democrats.
Okay.
You know? So that is one of the things. With Arizona, it was very interesting, because Arizona has, you know, an equal. They are largely Republican, but this time it flipped Democrat, because, you know, Trump got into a tussle with John McCain. And John McCain, as we know, was Obama's, the first time Obama ran for election, he ran against John McCain. The second term was against Mitt Romney. And John McCain was a war hero from Vietnam, and, you know, Trump made fun of him, ridiculed him. He told him, I prefer people who are not caught, because John McCain was caught in Vietnam and tortured. So his wife, his widowed wife recently, Cindy McCain, came out in support of John,
John,
right?
okay.
And so therefore John McCain and Biden were good friends, and she endorsed Biden over Trump. So that is one of the strong
That
factors, I
helped.
think, which flipped the vote by 3-4%, because
Okay.
that's the percentage we are looking at in these in these 4 states largely, which is Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona.
Okay, so how the primary system, that is, how candidates are elected?
So to make it clear for the viewers, India has a multi-party system. The Americans have a bi-party system, or a two-party system, as it is famously called. All right. So how are the candidates elected? So first, what happens is, since it's a two-party system, they have something called a primary process and then a general election.
Yeah.
So the primary process is when the parties choose their candidates from within. So now these primaries, we won't get into too much details, but I will give you a general gist. This primary process is decided at the state level.
Okay.
How the primary process is to be conducted.
Okay.
So if it's an open primary in some states, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents can come and vote, right? That is, Republicans can even vote in the Democratic primaries and vice versa,
Okay.
right? Whereas if it is a closed primary, only registered party members can vote.
Okay.
So you have to register as a Democrat to be willing to vote for the closed primary.
Okay.
Okay, so largely Republicans have closed primaries.
Mm.
Okay, and the third system is called a caucus system. Some states have this. We won't get into the technicalities of this, but there it is more like a negotiation. You have to go and convince the local party leaders,
Okay.
and then it's like a small electoral college of sorts, and then they affirm the leader,
Okay.
and who wins that state, and then you do this state by state, and then you announce the Democratic Party candidate, the Republican Party candidate, and then they go and battle state-wise again. So
Okay.
this is how it happens.
So we spoke about the party system. Now, a country like India, it's so vibrant with so many political parties, and regional parties have a greater say in the national politics, right? So, but there it's all about being red or blue. So, how is it, how democracy functions effectively if there are just two parties dealing with things?
Yeah. So one of the funny things was this, right? When Ralph Nader, who ran against corporate welfare, he ran as an independent party candidate. And the funny thing was, Mickey Mouse got more votes than Ralph Nader, right? Because people wrote in Mickey Mouse and things. So you have all these sorts of funny things that go on. So, there is this famous joke in the US. I think that will capture this point, So a Democrat and a Republican go to a coffee shop, and then they're having a conversation, right? So the Democrat says to the Republican, my father was a Democrat, my grandfather was a Democrat, and my great-grandfather was a Democrat. And then the Republican says, so you mean to say, if your father was a donkey, your grandfather was a donkey, and your great-grandfather was a donkey, what would that make you? And so the Democrat says, of course a Republican. Right? So this is the thing with bi-party politics, right? So it is so polarized. It's like there's no middle ground, and there's no, those forces are emerging. We'll look at that more today in terms of the elections itself. Yeah.
So as you talk about Democrats versus Republicans, I get to understand with what we have seen so far. I don't think they vary a lot when it comes to things like the economic policies. Maybe they are culturally different, but I think the same kind of things going on, except with the regime of Trump, where things were completely in a state of disarray. But Democrats and Republicans, how do they differ, in their policies and in their functioning?
That's a very good point. So we can look at this along the lines of two poles, right? So there is something being referred to by scholars as the American deep state. And a part of this is the military-industrial complex as well as the corporates. And you call this also the neoliberal consensus, which had its birth with Reagan and the Washington Consensus. And the idea is free market economics, which is dovetailed to American foreign policy of hawkishness. All right. So economically, the Democrats are a bit more in favor of a welfare state, that is social security and these sorts of things, whereas the Republicans are more in favor of cutting taxes, which is supply side economics, driven by the ideas of Milton Friedman and Hayek, Nozick, and all these kinds of people. Minimal role for the state. The Democrats are more like Lasky, T.H. Green, Rawls, which
Yeah.
is more about for legitimacy of democracy, the economics needs to be redistributed.
Yeah,
So
good
that is the
allocation of
idea.
resources.
Right.
Yeah.
So the question is only about how much redistribution.
Yeah.
Okay, what part of the pie are we willing to give? So the Democrats are willing to give, let's say, more for the working classes, and the Republicans a lot lesser. And the Republicans are more concerned with growth than redistribution.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
but largely speaking, their neoliberal policies are same. They listen to the same sorts of experts, right? You have the odd Joseph Stiglitz here and there, but he's only like a more you can say like a more mellowed down version of Milton Friedman.
Okay.
The difference, however, is in the cultural realm,
Okay.
right? Cultural policies, that is rights for women, rights for homosexuals, emphasis on family traditions.
Okay.
So the Republicans happen to be a bit more traditional,
Yeah. We
right?
can
They focus on family, therefore they're
more
a bit
conservative.
more conservative with abortion is a huge issue in the US, right? Because of the influence of Christianity. for
So
instance.
Democrats are relatively
They
progressive.
call themselves progressive in the sense that they're all about, to use the famous phrase, of rock and roll, that sort of a culture. So if you want to think the pop culture of the Democrats, you can look at the pop culture in the United States that comes out. The famous artists, like Nicki Minaj and all these people that people listen to these days. So yeah,
But however, we see groups and splitting inside Democrats and Republicans now. So are they, kind of moving away from their thing?
that is a very good point, because right now what has happened is because of the deep state and the consolidation, ossification, and there is a certain sort of a rigid structure that has consolidated itself, right? Which we call the military-industrial complex, or as we call it, the deep state. So there was a lot of resentment against this, because in the quintessential line that we know, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, right? And we saw the Wall Street movement with the rhetoric of 99% versus the 1%.
1%.
So the middle class is shrinking, right? So it seems like the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting really poorer. And this was famously pointed out by Thomas Piketty in his groundbreaking work Capital, where he shows the rate of returns of investments of a few rich people is outgrowing the growth of the United States GDP.
Okay.
Right. So it was showing that. So there's a lot of resentment against this. So there has been, of course, reforms or movements within the party, fractions. So one wing is called, what would you call the Democratic Socialist wing or the Progressive wing, spearheaded by Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and the new people who are, members of that are Alejandro Ocasio-Cortez, who's like a young, she was a bartender, but she's a charismatic politician, just at the age of 29. She's made it big and all of that, right? And within the Republican parties, this reform happened much earlier, and this was called the Tea Party, right? And the Tea Parties are, how would you call them, is economically fully free market oriented, and socially, what happens is they're completely, it's not that they take a stand for values or against progressive values like rights for women or blacks or something, but it's like the state should determine it, the center should not determine it.
Okay.
Right? So they don't have a position. So they're all about free markets, free markets, free markets.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think we have spoken enough about the parties and things.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Democrats or Republicans, who's better for the world? Who's better for India?
This is a very difficult situation, right? Because what happens is with a lot of the Republican presidents, but you can say with the neoliberal consensus, as far as the world is considered, there is more continuity rather than change in their foreign policy. So, for instance, when it came to Bill Clinton, Bush and Obama, we didn't see a huge difference. There was hugely continuity, right? So now Trump was the great disruptor. He ruffled the deep state in one way or another, right? But however, with Trump, what happens is domestically and around the world also, there has been an increase in polarization amongst people, especially along cultural lines, right? So his attitude by not discouraging or condemning the Ku Klux Klan and the white nationalist movement, supporting people like Alex Jones, who's a famous sort of demagogue and rhetorical guy, and Steve Bannon is another who considers himself an economic populist slash nationalist. So you have this economic nationalism dovetailed with racial populism, which is the problem. Okay. Whereas if and this seems to be the direction that when the Republicans generally come to power, there is, the Afghan invasion happened with the Republican, and so did the Iraq invasion. So there is more wars in the world, but however, it's good for India because Republicans are more in favor of India.
So they are more pro-India than Democrats.
Yeah, for instance, we saw during the Bush era, we saw the 123 deal, the Hyde Act, the different nuclear acts which happened, and there was fresh energy that was put in and everything, right? Whereas with the Democrats,
they bring Pakistan to the table all the time.
Yeah, they will keep bringing Pakistan to the table all the time, right? But then they support multilateral institutions. So it's good for the world. The Republicans are generally about dismantling these institutions. Whereas the Democrats want these institutions. But the thing is, they see themselves as saviors of the minority. So they'll always bring, and they don't understand, to me it seems like they have a poor or shallow understanding about the depth of issues. So they'll bring Pakistan to the table always, right? So, and in every country they'll go and poke their nose and say, you're oppressing them, therefore we are coming to save you, and this sort of thing, because they are driven by this American exceptionalism as well. Ironically, more so than the Republicans in some way, because Republicans now are saying protectionism, let's stay back, let's not go out there.
And that is problematic for globalization and a globalized world.
Unglobalized world. But as we see, the deep state has an excess amongst Democrats and Republicans.
Okay.
So we can't point this out so cut
clearly
and dry as well, So it is not a watertight compartment.
Trust Trump doctrine with Biden doctrine.
Yeah, so this is going to be a slightly tough one, especially looking at what Trump doctrine is. Because Trump doctrine is more...
so you mean to say there was nothing concrete during Trump's reign?
No, I think there is a pattern, there is concrete formula, but it is not the traditional formula that we are used to speaking
so it
in
differs
foreign
from
policy.
Tradition. Yeah.
Right. And the pattern seems to be purely transactional, no? I mean, America largely has a transactional policy, but they have this notion of American exceptionalism and all of that. But with Trump, it seems to be more about his personal exceptionalism and his own business and him being the showman, sort of a guy, right? If you look at the show he ran, The Apprentice, he comes and he puts on a show and he fires people. That's what he does, right? So, so the thing about Trump doctrine is, it has been very interesting because he has clearly disrupted and sent the deep state into disarray. He has fired people left, right and center. Right, but he's also managed a few strange things which we couldn't have never imagined, right?
Especially in the Middle East.
Middle East is one, North Korea is another.
Yeah, rapprochement with North Korea.
One. The Middle East, he put his son-in-law in charge, who was called Jared Kushner, and people criticized him a lot about his expertise. The guy doesn't talk a lot, but he's managed, for instance, to break, for instance, to get a lot of the Arab states to get behind Israel, like UAE and Saudi Arabia, and of course Saudi Arabia's allies and all of those kinds of things, right? So, and it almost seems like Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, is in talks with Israel also for a few things, in terms of economic trade and those sorts of things. So he's managed to split the Middle East along a tri-directional axis, So it is more like now there is Iran, then there is Israel, and then there is Saudi Arabia and their allies, and a lot of them are willing to talk to Israel. So Iran is perhaps one of the failures of the Trump doctrine, because the JCPOA seemed to have been a good thing, but I think because of the lot of the rhetoric of the Republicans before Trump who came in, one thing, and the second thing is also the general American interest in Iran. America has been poking its nose in Iran since installing the Shah of Persia in the 70s. Right? Recently they killed Mohammad Soleimani also. So it doesn't bode well for the future in that one realm. But otherwise in the Middle East, there is, for instance, ISIS Al-Baghdadi was killed, and
Yeah.
ISIS has been largely
Dismantling
dismantled.
in ISIS,
Right?
yeah.
And people are finding more convergence in the Middle East there than division, for now at least.
And Afghanistan,
Yeah,
another important point.
Afghanistan is another thing, right? Because he's trying to bring more people in. That's also because US wants to abdicate responsibility. So Trump, in other words, ran on an anti-war policy, and I would say has managed to reverse the deep state's hawkish policy or regime change policy, as they would call it, which Obama didn't manage, though he promised. Right? He promised to withdraw troops from Afghanistan and Iran, Iraq and all of that.
And that's why maybe Trump was more a superhero in foreign policy.
Yeah, he's a superhero in foreign policy, one reason, and also he's seen as a superhero domestically because this is a guy trying to break the deep state, who has impoverished the middle classes, right? So he is their hero in some ways. He goes and fires people. He takes revenge.
So how is it going to be with Biden?
So with Biden, it's very interesting because largely it's going to be continuity of the Obama era policy, largely. But Biden as a person, it's unclear what he's going to be. You know, Abraham Lincoln had this famous quote who says, I don't claim that I had created any of these circumstances, but rather the circumstances have created my
Created me,
policies,
yeah.
right? So could Biden be someone like that? But I mean, Abraham Lincoln had a very strong personality and clarity. With Biden, you know, he's middle class Joe at the end of the day, you know, so there are things that way, right? So when it comes to some of his, he seems to be a dove and a hawk. He's hawkish because, you know, the Panama intrusion, Grenada, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Gulf War. He involved himself in Yugoslavia, in the Yugoslavian wars and the splitting, right? So many of these things, right? One of the positive areas of hawkish policy was that he supported Trump in his dismantling of ISIS. So he just took a strong stance there. In terms of being dovish, he has come out admitting his mistake in voting for the Iraq war when he was senator, right? And he said that he was misled or underestimated the extent to which people like Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense, right, had their sway on George Bush, for instance, right? And he didn't support the Libyan war to a large extent. He has also been a little bit critical of Hillary Clinton because Hillary Clinton was extremely hawkish, right? And he has, you know, and he has been mild with drone attacks. He has not supported it explicitly and things like that. He has also, for instance, but
He is being compared with JFK. So how do you see that?
yeah, they say he has the JFK model of governance because JFK was also like a very relatable guy. He solved the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of that. But to my knowledge of US politics and what I see of Biden, I don't think he is as charismatic as JFK. You know, JFK had a certain aura about him. If he would go, he could, you know, talk to Khrushchev, for instance, and, you know, the Cuban Missile Crisis was averted. Biden comes across as an indecisive guy he seems a bit confused and disoriented all the time, no? So he's going to depend a lot on advisors, and we see this from his campaign running itself, no?
Okay.
He has already, you know, brought in about some 2,000 diplomatic advisors. So, and it largely looks like he's hiring people straight from Goldman Sachs and Milton Friedman School and Chicago School of Economics. So it seems to be a return to business back as usual. So what are the positives of this?
It's going to be like we have a good multilateral institution functioning.
Yeah, for example, you can...
We can talk about RIC, where, you know,
yeah, we'll
Russia
come
and China.
to RIC a bit later, but multilateralism in terms of climate change and those things, you know?
Yeah, Trump was highly skeptical and he did not want to be a part of UNESCO. He wanted to pull back from WHO.
Yeah.
He wanted almost every international organization to be running without US.
Without US. So he was more protectionist. And
Yeah.
he involved himself in trade wars and all of that.
Yes.
Trump is more easier. Biden is a bit more easier when it comes all of this, right? He's definitely going to bring back WTO, UNESCO. He's going to be more proactive there. He wants the UN to work, for instance, right? The US climate accord, the Paris Accord, that is, right? So all this will be back on the table.
The other positive is he's more willing to engage with China.
Yeah, that is why I brought in the RIC point.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring it down to the general and then narrow down to RIC. Because RIC we can talk in terms of India also. Since he's more willing to engage with China and Russia, India might not have such a difficult time. For instance,
To
because
balance between Russia and
Russia, China
and
versus the US, right? So it might make our job easier. But the problem with Biden is because of this moral virtue signaling sort of democratic base.
Article 370 will be on the table.
Yes, and
Pakistan will be on the table.
NRC is on the table.
Table.
CAA is
will
on the
be
table.
Yeah.
So all these will also determine relationships forward, right? So that aspect is going to be a bit tricky
Challenging
for
for
India,
India.
to navigate. But otherwise, it's going to be largely, like I said, continuity. And of course, we don't know about the personal sort of chemistry between Biden and Modi because we had
It began with a phone call 2 days back. Biden had called our prime
traditional customary phone call, right? But
Yeah.
with Trump, we saw Howdy Modi and Namaste,
Namaste
Trump,
Trump.
and events like that. So
On the one side, we saw things like this, but on the other hand, we saw the generalized system of preferences. We did not have a good say in GSP. The 301 report, where our intellectual property things, we had a tussle with US, and the CARTA Act, which we opposed. So, how are we going to see these things changing in the Biden era?
see, largely what the things you have stated out has to do with the economics and strategic, right? So in the Biden era, we might get a bit more relaxations in terms of CAATSA, for instance. CAATSA is sanctions against enemy countries like Russia, right? So India buys BrahMos, we have a joint development with Russia. So that is where the issue is. So all that I think will be a bit relaxed. But these stumbling blocks are not going to change. It's going to be the same because this
Transaction is anyway going to continue.
no, it's not about transaction. This is nested in the larger issue of developing versus developed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is going to always be there, right? So it's not going to be a large thing. But larger orientation is the general foreign policy. What is it going to look like, right? So I think it is indecisive as of now, right? So yeah, and
How is Kamala Harris going to play a role in this particular thing? How, with Kamala Harris, can we see changes in US, the way US looks at India?
so with Kamala Harris, this is the trick, no? So there is all these debates going on. How Indian is Kamala Harris really?
Yeah.
Has she taken on her Indian identity or has she abdicated it, etc., etc., right? So the thing with Kamala Harris is, see, for the pop culture Americans, that is the Democrats largely, multiculturalism and multilateralism, that is multiculturalism, the acceptance of various cultures, is more like a priori given, right? It is a fascination sort of a thing. So do they really know about Indian identity, the depth of it and all that? Probably no. So it is not like she's going to affirm her Indian identity or like reject it,
Okay.
right? But largely with Kamala Harris, again, that is nested in this larger culture of being the world's moral police, right? So it's going to be like you guys are involved in Islamophobia and Pakistan. J&K is like you exercising muscle power and things like that. So you have this entire movement within the Democratic Party who Kamala Harris supports, right? Because she would be one of those culturally very outspoken voices when it comes to issues like this. So it might be a step backward over there
Okay.
in the larger foreign policy issues, but some other issues like H1B visas, and those kinds of things, it will be more relaxed than Trump.
Okay.
Because Trump's H1B visa policy, Ashley Tellis termed it as insane, right? Because it was a bit insane because America is largely driven by immigrant talent, right? So
And I want to just bring in the China angle. So Biden seems to be a bit pro-China. How are we going to deal with the current scenario now? We have border issues with them, escalations going on. So
that it will make the issue easier, na?
yeah, so we can see negotiations.
Yeah, you can see negotiations, but the point is J&K will be on the table now. What does India do with J&K?
Yeah.
So we don't know. So we'll have to see.
Wait and watch.
So again, every opportunity, every threat is an opportunity.
Opportunity.
It depends on how we negotiate. But it means it's good because there's space for diplomatic push and diplomatic negotiation. So it opens up. It depends on our performance, but the stage looks good
Yeah.
in that sense of it, right?
Okay.
Whereas Trump disrupted the stage completely.
Okay. Yeah. So to conclude,
Yeah.
how is it going to be for America? How is Biden going to be in America? Like,
So domestically, I read this article recently and I really like this line. I think it pretty much summarizes what I want to say. It says, America needs Biden more than it needs Biden doctrine. Okay,
Yeah.
because the country is terribly divided. People are not talking to each other. They're not having breakfast and lunch together because they can only think in terms of Democrat and Republican. The
Yeah.
famous donkey joke comes to mind. Not the famous, but I mean the joke I just said, told you about. And that seems to be on the domestic front.
in the international arena?
In the international arena, we spoke about the positives. So it is a plus for multilateralism, and we might see a ricochet back to TPP and those sorts of things. It's still unclear. So those areas will be easily reversed, but whereas relations with Iran and the JCPOA, for instance, right, there it's going to be tough because they have killed, Trump has ended up killing Soleimani. So now how is he going to negotiate this, right? So it's going to be difficult in those areas.
And finally, with India?
With India, I liked Ashley Tellis, who said that he increasingly sees India becoming a football in American foreign policy, because India is going to be this like ping pong between the Democrats and the Republicans, right? So culturally, the Democrats might condemn India's policies because they are anti, the current government and Hindutva and those sorts of things. Republicans really don't care about that much, and they support that, right? Over the economics. They believe in the economics more, whereas these guys will speak about this a bit more. But ultimately, when it comes to the economic aspect, I think they will agree. But when it comes to the cultural aspect and the idealist aspect of foreign policy, not the realist aspect, I think India will be a football there,
Okay.
whereas there will be consolidation around the economics.
Yeah. So I think we have had a good discussion about the entire subject.
Yeah.
Thank you, and we will meet you in the next episode.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.